John Fitzgerald Kennedy was born May 29, 1917 in Brookline, Massachusetts. He was born into a family of devout Catholics and powerful politicians. From Boston mayors to Massachusetts senators, his family greatly influenced the politics of 20th century America. The Kennedy family immigrated to America from Ireland in the height of the Irish potato famine. When the Kennedys arrived in Boston in 1849, they experienced the sectionalism and regionalism of America firsthand. In 1884, only 35 years after their arrival to the United States, the first Kennedy was elected into public office. As the years went on, the Kennedy family's reputation grew and they became a political powerhouse in the United States.
Kennedy had 8 siblings: Joseph Jr., Rosemary, Kathleen, Eunice, Patricia, Robert, Jean Ann, and lastly Edward. Joseph Jr., the first Kennedy child, was a U.S. Navy lieutenant in World War II who was tragically killed in combat. JFK's younger sister, Rosemary Kennedy, experienced seizures, mood swings, and slower mental development throughout her childhood and early adult years. Their father decided to organize a prefrontal lobotomy surgery, a practice used on mentally disabled patients, which severs the brain's connection to the prefrontal cortex. This procedure left her unable to walk or talk, and she suffered lifelong hardship. Their next daughter, Kathleen, married William Cavendish, but they were tragically killed in a plane crash at the age of 28.
Eunice Kennedy Shriver was especially close to her sister Rosemary. She founded the Special Olympics Program, a sports organization for both physically and intellectually disabled youth. She became a lifelong advocate for children's health and disabilities. Patricia Kennedy Lawford worked for the John F. Kennedy Memorial Library and Museum, as well as the National Center on Addiction, in order to create change around the country. Robert Kennedy was also a successful Kennedy politician, becoming U.S. Attorney General in 1961 and a U.S. Senator in 1965. He began his presidential campaign in 1968, but was assassinated before the election. Their youngest daughter, Jean Ann Kennedy Smith, served as the United States ambassador to Ireland and developed programs for the disabled as well. The youngest of the Kennedys, Edward, was elected as a U.S. Senator in 1962, and he obtained that role until his death in 2009.
John F. Kennedy attended many different elementary, middle, and high schools, including Noble and Greeno Lower School, Riverdale Country School, Canterbury School, and Choate Boarding School. He then went on to attend Harvard University, earning a bachelor's degree in the arts of government in 1940.
Post-college, Kennedy enlisted in the United States Navy. He completed all the training required and was sent to fight in World War II. He became a lieutenant, and his leadership was tested in 1943 when his crew and their PT-109 ship was attacked in the Solomon Islands. He helped to keep the survivors safe by swimming them to safety and staying alive for 4 days on the islands. Luckily, they were later found by 2 islanders whom they communicated with through writing on a coconut.
He earned the Marine Corps Medal and Purple Heart Medal for his heroic actions in saving the crew of the PT-109 ship. His war hero reputation helped him win a seat in Congress, as his strong leadership and ability to react under pressure was displayed, and ultimately saved up to 12 lives. Even when he ran for president, his war honors attracted many of his votes and supporters.
John F. Kennedy was elected as a United States Representative in 1947. He served 1 term and then was elected to Congress in 1953. Kennedy was United States Senator until 1960. He ran for president against Richard Nixon in 1961, winning the presidency by 84 Electoral College votes. He ran on the premise that under his administration, the United States would aid any country whose independence was threatened. He also promised the country that he would increase the funding for the Food for Peace emergency program and supply economic aid to any country in need. Along with his policies, many votes could be attributed to his good looks in comparison to his running mate, especially during the 1960 Nixon-Kennedy presidential debate.
Mr. Nixon and I disagreed, and his tie vote his breaking the tie defeated the proposal.
That's the same percentage that it was 20 years ago. And as far as the absolute gap is concerned, we find that the United States is even further ahead than it was 20 years ago.
President Kennedy was the first president to bring light to mental illness and disabilities. He began his push for a new approach towards intellectual disabilities with a special message to the Congress on mental illness and mental retardation, given on February 5, 1963. This message outlined a bold new approach for addressing mental illnesses and disabilities in schools, workplaces, and public places. His approach included new programs for extended maternity and paternity leave and the construction of research facilities and treatment centers for those disabled. Kennedy also stressed the importance of special education in schools. During his special message on mental illness and mental retardation, he urged,
"We as a nation have neglected too long the mentally ill and the mentally retarded. It affects all of us, and it affects us as a country."
Not only did he bring awareness to the subject, but also provided $329 million in funding for mental health centers.
President Kennedy signed two major pieces of legislation that changed the lives of those disabled during his presidency. The first being the Maternal and Child Health and Mental Retardation Planning Amendment to the Social Security Act, and the second being Public Law 88-164. The Maternal and Child Health and Mental Retardation Planning Amendment provided the funds for states to improve and update their intellectual illness and disability programs within public schools. This amendment also funded longer maternity and paternity leave for government and state employees. The Public Law 88-164 provided federal funding for the construction of research and treatment facilities for people with mental retardation.
President Kennedy grew up alongside his sister Rosemary and witnessed her struggle throughout her life. She began with slightly slower development, such as learning to walk and talk, and grew to struggle increasingly more. Growing into her 20s, she began to experience sudden mood swings and seizures. With the Kennedy family always being in the public eye, her parents eventually allowed for a lobotomy to be performed on her at age 22. However, she was left much worse off than before, leaving her incapacitated and in need of care for the remainder of her life. John and her siblings, especially Eunice and Jean, witnessed their sister depend on others with little to no relief or care for her conditions for her entire life. Due to the extreme lack in funding and research, Rosemary was never even diagnosed for her disabilities. This personal connection inspired him to be the first president to push for legislation to help those struggling like his sister.
Since he had an immediate family member that was affected by mental disability, he knew the tolls that it could take on a family. His sister was shunned by his parents and hidden away for the majority of her life. President Kennedy saw the struggles his sister faced in her life as well. Kate Clifford Larson, the author of Rosemary, the Hayden Kennedy daughter, includes a quote by Anthony Kennedy Shriver, the nephew of Rosemary Kennedy and founder of the Best Buddies program. "The interest Rosemary sparked in my family towards people with special needs will one day go down as the greatest accomplishment that any Kennedy has made on a global basis. This evidence reveals that President Kennedy was inspired to advocate for people with mental and physical disabilities due to his experience with his sister and her mental disability."
Kennedy's advocacy for the treatment of those with mental and physical disabilities have inspired other presidents to create legislation of their own that improves the services extended to the disabled. In 1966, Kennedy's successor, President Lyndon B. Johnson, created the President's Committee for People with Intellectual Disabilities, which promoted policies and initiatives to support and accept people with intellectual disabilities into society. In 1973, President Richard Nixon signed the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, which provided civil rights to those disabled and introduced the concept of a 504 plan. Currently, in 2022, people with intellectual and physical disabilities are included in society and given extra educational opportunities in order to allow them to succeed in the same ways as their classmates.
Another nationwide issue that President Kennedy made a point to address was immigration. The early 19th century in America was packed with restrictive immigration policies, such as the Immigration Act of 1924 and the Nationality Act of 1940, which prevented many immigrants from other countries from becoming U.S. citizens. America was a system of nationalism that worked to discriminate against those who were not born in the U.S. However, as the 20th century progressed, the country was moving towards a more inclusive immigration policy. In 1943, the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, which banned immigrants from China and authorized deportation of all illegal Chinese immigrants, was repealed. In 1953, the Immigration and Nationality Act was established, which removed race and nationality as a restriction for immigration, while also granting China 100 U.S. visas per year. 1953 also introduced the Refugee Relief Act, which permitted 200,000 refugees into America and allowed them to eventually become permanent residents.
President Kennedy began his advocacy for immigration in 1962 with the Migration and Refugee Assistance Act. This was enacted as a way to meet the urgency and needs of refugees and victims who were displaced from their homes around the world. The Migration and Refugee Assistance Act created a program that supplied Cuban refugees, especially children, with medical care, financial aid, child welfare, education, and resettlement. This act also began the Cuban refugee program, which assisted Cubans in fleeing the country and settling into their new home in the United States. Kennedy led a push for the end of quotas that unfairly favored immigration coming from certain typically white countries. His expression of his own heritage and his belief that America was built on immigration helped convince citizens and public officials to support the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965, which was passed by his successor Lyndon B. Johnson in honor of Kennedy and his desire to level the playing field on immigration.
The Kennedy family had always been proud of their Irish heritage, and President Kennedy spoke very fondly of his ancestors and their country.
When my great-grandfather left here to become a cooper in East Boston, he carried nothing with him except two things: a strong religious faith and a strong desire for liberty. And I'm glad to say that all of his great-grandchildren have valued that inheritance.
As he addressed the people of New Ross, Ireland in June of 1963, Kennedy strongly believed that the United States of America was founded and built on immigration. He felt that without immigration, the country would not be what it is today. Kennedy even wrote and published a book on this topic, A Nation of Immigrants, where he shares his belief that every American who ever lived, with the exception of one group, was either an immigrant himself or a descendant of immigrants. Without his personal connection to his ancestors and the topic of immigration, President Kennedy may not have advocated for the legislation that he focused much of his presidency on.
Immigration was a huge agenda pushed by the Kennedy administration. President Kennedy's family prospered and flourished under their migration to America. His family had yet another rags to riches story, similar to that of Andrew Carnegie, an industrial capitalist admired in the Gilded Age. The Kennedy family also made their mark on American society and politics. President Kennedy strongly believed that immigration allowed the United States to grow. As each new wave of immigration has reached America, it has been faced with problems. Somehow, the difficult adjustments are made, and people get down to the task of earning a living, raising a family, living with their neighbors, and in the process, building a nation, mentioned Kennedy in A Nation of Immigrants. President Theodore Roosevelt had a similar view of immigration to that of President Kennedy. In an address given to the Knights of Columbus in 1915, President Roosevelt declares, "There is no room in this country for hyphenated Americanism. The one absolutely certain way of bringing this nation to ruin, of preventing all possibility of its continuing to be in a nation at all, would be to permit it to become a tangle of squabbling nationalities."
President Kennedy's belief that America is a nation of immigrants has also inspired additional presidents to expand immigration to the United States to people from all over the world. In 1965, Johnson enacted the Immigration Act of 1965, which extended immigration to citizens of Southern Europe, Eastern Europe, and Asia. Presently, over 1,180,000 people immigrate to the United States per year, and the idea that America is a nation of immigrants is still very prevalent in society.
Overall, President John F. Kennedy, in his very limited time in office, was an incredibly effective president who changed the lives of many United States citizens. His personal struggles and background played a major role in the issues he emphasized and created legislation on. Through his family and cultural background, he set the stage for many other laws and policies to come into effect